there. My name is Greg J. Smith. I'm a Canadian writer and cultural worker with Holo. And today I am joined by Burak Arikan, a New York-based artist whose work deals with blockchain networks and mapping networks of power. And this is the third episode of Alt History, an online speaker series where we turn to artists to help us understand lost and forgotten moments in digital culture. So what do I mean by alt history? New technologies and cultural developments are often synonymous with erasure. We forget how or why we used to do things. Sometimes we forget what words mean or communities meant or that they even existed. So we try to underscore some of these forgotten moments, practices, or labor that have faded from memory or been forgotten or erased from the last 3 decades. So our goal is not simply to wax nostalgic about the past, but critically engage this erasure or forgetting and use it to make sense of the present. The series is brought to you by Generation, a Braga, Portugal-based space for creation, performance, and exhibition with the domain of contemporary music and the relationship between art and technology. And my team at Holo. We're an editorial and curatorial platform founded in 2012. We focus on tracking emerging trajectories of art, science, and technology. Basically, we're interested in interdisciplinary practice that doesn't really fit neatly into categories. And we do this in a few ways. In periodicals, I've got a few of them here. Online at our website, holo.mg, where we track practice on an evolving timeline, and through collaborations with cultural partners, exactly like you are watching right now. So thanks again to Generation for the invitation to host this series. And yeah, this is going to be a really exciting episode. As I mentioned, I'm joined by Burak Arikan. I've been engaging with him around his practice, which I think is fascinating for more than a decade, and we're going to be talking about net art. So just to provide some intro for Burak, so he doesn't have to introduce himself. Burak is, I mentioned earlier, a New York-based artist. He explores emerging political economies of data, decentralized infrastructures, and blockchain technology. He investigates societal issues and develops his findings into abstract machinery, which generates network maps and algorithmic interfaces. And this results in performances and procreates predictions to render inherent power relationships visible and discussable. His software prints, installations, and performance have been featured in exhibitions internationally, and he is also the founder of Graph Commons, a collaborative platform for mapping, analyzing, and publishing data networks. So, Burak, please take it away.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks a lot. It's great to talk to you again. I think, yeah, I remember, I think we've been in conversation for quite a while now. Early days of your practice and my practice probably as well. So, Greg asked me to talk about net art a little bit, and it's like my inspiration in my work. The thing is, like, this field has been, discussed a lot. If you can find so many resources online, and there are like, numerous talks and panels and exhibitions, museums and shows around the world about this topic and this field. And I want to basically pick some of those and present as like maybe a background to discuss further by the other ideas. And the ones especially that I'm actually influenced by and I like a lot. So I will share my screen as well, Greg, if that's okay. So we see some material as well. Following the tradition of net art, I will present everything on a web browser. So there'll be a lot of tabs that I switch to and zoom in, zoom out, scroll, etc. And maybe for 10 minutes or something, and I will, I guess, more do a conversation with Greg. Net art was an art movement started in the mid-90s, I would say. When the web was just becoming a place where anyone can publish and connect to each other, share documents and files and images, and it's like a big global communication system that's more effective than anything else before. Like that's the internet, the beginning of the internet. And at the time, like many people who use this system, net artists, what are called net artists today, are also like artists who basically started playing with this new media, let's say, through the web browser and other mechanisms. But they do it in a more like a subversive way. They kind of interrogated politics of that time, economies of that time, the material cultures of that time. And I think there are like two I would say, like important impact of this practice. One is this, these artists use this medium as a, the web itself as a medium, right? And they reached many people in many different ways compared to traditional art in general. And then it also, secondly, it allowed artists to explore their artistic, practice and identities beyond traditional art institutions. They were like out of the institutional mechanisms that are well known in the art world. So there are two things, and like what we're looking at right now, Monoscope's net art page, and this is a wiki-like system, Monoscope, and they have very good content here. You can go through the different artists, their events. There's a historic list of events. These are shows and panels and conferences and so on. Also catalogs and books that are about net art. There are so many of them. You can check out themselves later on. And obviously, online exhibitions and databases are available. Again, many versions of those, like from Rhizome to AdaWeb, Turbulence. And then you can see, the books published, quite good amount, actually. I like Christian Paul's lectures a lot on this. If you want to take a look at it, it's really good. It's on YouTube. And Natalie Bookchin, Rachel Greeny, Josephine Bosma, these are like some authors who wrote about this field in more detail. Also artists like Olia Lialina that we'll talk about later on. She published her own books as well, and quite good. And like the Net Artist is one of them, is a good one. And also like especially Rhizome's The Art Happens Here catalog is quite comprehensive. There are a lot of good examples there. Yeah, and then I think the important thing is like to kind of mention in 1995 the term net.art, where it came from, was a big discussion. What's known today is that it was the first time I think used by NetTime. The NetTime email list's co-founder Piet Schulz, also a good friend, is a title for an exhibition in Berlin in 1995. In which I think Vuk Kosik and Alexei Shulgin was showing, and in that context, NetTime email list is quite important because it was like an email list founded by these 2-3 scholars of their time. I'm part of this. Many of us probably were in this email list, and where the theorists, artists, different people discussed. They kind of built this what's called net critique over time. It was like a backdrop to the context of the net art. Also, like a lot of artists also for the first time they shared their work in this email list. Was influencing the the artists of their time, the discussion forum, let's say, in other words. The other backdrop for this discussion, the net art movement, is like the availability of these, social media, not social media, sorry, like the early web, like the blogs, for instance, and the surf clubs that they were used to be called like, people were sharing all kinds of stuff with each other, and the rise of all these, communication technologies, more advanced communication technologies, kind of allowed this world to exist. So also you can see a very good, like there are many lists, like chronological lists of pieces that are created at this time, and there are many examples of them online again, but this is one of them from I think called Arts. You can see it from the URL where it is from, and this is an archival link, so I opened that from the web archive, and you see in 1994 different artists were creating different work. So we will look at some of those examples, and I think around 1996 it became really like huge. Suddenly, like 1997, a lot of artists started creating a lot of different types of works in this area. Yeah, so another timeline also in Rhizome.org's archives. You can also check this out. There's so many works you can see, there are about a variety of different aspects of net art. I should say, like, first in the late 90s, when the artist-run organizations, how they began commissioning artists and organizing net art shows at the time. Among them, some of them I also get commissioned myself. Turbulence.org, I should mention Helen Torrington and Joanne Green were running it. They started commissioning that art in 1996. And again, these are the reasons the artists were able to make art. This is like not so easy. At the end of the day, you still need some support as an artist, who are doing experimental work. Further afield from UK, Ruth Catlow and Mark Garrett, they started in 1996 as well. And it's like a physical space and plus, a community space, community to run, artist-run community space, let's say, or shows and discussions. Rhizome, also that same year, 1996, started to do this. Mark Tribe was the founder. They basically started the archival work and the first email list, and it became more like a website. Neural Magazine, Alessandro Ludovico from Italy, you may know, and his magazine was about, in general, digital culture, but then also covered a lot of the internet art-based work. Intelligent Agent magazine by, again, Christian Paul, amazing, and magazine and newsletter at the time. Upgrade International, a meetup network, more like global. Yael Kanarek was the founder, and then became more like a distributed, self-organized meetups. I've been to many of them in my early days. In Turkey, in Brazil, in Europe. It's like really international. And then a lot of interesting, more like organized events took place. Like Read Me Festival was a very important 2002, a little later, but it was more focused on software art and more like the internet kind of transition from the internet art or network-based art to software-based art. The founding of the Institute of Network Cultures in Netherlands, in Amsterdam, was very important. ISEA conference started showing up artists from this area. ISEA, the Inter-Society for Electronic Arts, quite important, again, institution, I think. And around 1990, late 90s, of course, suddenly, this type of artwork started showing up in more traditional art venues like Documenta in 1997. They included the works of different artists, and I think starting from early 2000, we started seeing like more traditional museums and art institutions start commissioning programs around net art or supporting net art. Like, for instance, Tate Intermedia Art Program was very important. Whitney Artport in 2001 started, also very important. New Museum, kind of in collaboration with Rhizome, started doing this type of work. And behind them, a lot of funding, I think it's important, came from, for instance, Danielle Langlois Foundation in Quebec, I think. Very important. They supported, a lot of this work and individual artists or programs of museums and so on. Very important. And all of archival and documentation work too was supported by them, like the Radical Software magazine. It's not a net art thing, but it's a very important, publication of its time. Toma Foundation more recently started that way, like they support museums and their programs, and with that, this enables artists to obviously work. Let's see. There's some other more examples, like Artport as an example. You should check this out, definitely. Yeah, I want to now talk about particular artworks that I like a lot and very important in this field. And I'll start with Olia Lialina. But before that, I want to tell one thing very important, that just to kind of summarize this entire practice. And these artists are not using this media in a representational way, like meaning they don't just put their images on the web so that other people can see. They are actually kind of playing and breaking the web itself. They'll ask questions like, what web can do for us, beyond that we cannot do in other media. So this is like a tradition of, artists, for instance, who questioned their media before. For instance, painters, abstract expressionism kind of emerged from, at the time, from painters where they were asking, they were basically trying to ask what painting can do, that we cannot do in other media. So they started playing with the media of painting itself, and they started not just making like a representation of figures in the human or landscape, but they did abstractions and more abstract work at that time. So similarly, these artists again, like for instance, Olia Lina, with her work, my boyfriend came from war. It's like an interactive film. Like I'll click on things, it will load different images and pages, you know, and I can just click through this work, and this will basically show me, you know, tell me the story of Olia is trying to explain here, you know. So this is like, again, 1996, quite early. You know, today it may feel, oh, okay, you know, we have all kinds of stuff right now. We can do 3D navigations, WebGL on the web, but this is like very early, you know. And this is an example of a work where kind of, you know, she called it, I think, Netfilm, or someone else has called Netfilm, and this work before. So you can really navigate through the work and try to, you know, it's like an interactive cinema, you know, in a way. And using iframes and hyperlinks and GIF images, animations, you can see on the left, you know, it's a combination of many things. Another work from her, I'll reload this page. It's a poem. It's a very interesting work, I think, where each letter is a GIF image. And as you see, it's loading right now. The loading itself is part of the work. The loading time itself is part of the work. I think this is a very good example of, you know, how they try to play with the media itself, you know, and it's not just image and it's or representation, it's like using loading time of within the work. Another work is Alexei Shulgin, form art. I tried to kind of run this, oh, it works, emulator, thanks to Net Rhizome's work on this. I think it's very important. They have this emulation of a Netscape browser. So we can actually play with this Alexei Shulgin's work from that time. I can click on these buttons, you know, it will take us to, you know, what she or he, sorry, intended. So you can actually, you know, close these windows, move them around. This is really funny. It's a real Netscape. So Alexei organized a form art competition and invited artists to contribute their form art. Like these are HTML forms, like, you know, in buttons and input fields and so on. And you can kind of click on them. You can see like there are all these very funny, you know, compositions, graphic compositions of using the input. So it's like a misuse of a media in a way, like by these different artists. And I really love this work. Good example of, you know, kind of breaking and playing with the media itself in different ways. Yeah, so you can go try it yourself. It's a pretty, you know, wonderful work. A lot of clickable things around here. So, okay. Going forward, so let me close this page. Yeah, another interesting work I found from Heath Bunting, a British artist. He wrote this kind of, or actually put this article about himself from a magazine, so I think the Telegraph newspaper maybe, into this page, and changed every letter, sorry, every word, or linked every word into a domain. Like for instance, if it says, like, if you had to classify him, if you look at the down, I don't know if you can see it, but on the bottom of the screen, you see every word is a domain, like classify.com, him.com, you know, if you had to, if.com, you had.com, had.com, to.com, goes like that. You can click on them, you know, classify.com, I know where it takes us, but some random place. So you see the work itself is dynamic because the ownership of these domains change over the years and they link to different pages. And it's a very long form time durational work in that way. It's like, to this day, I mean, right now we experience this work in a different way, and it was created, it was probably, you know, showing up different pages. And if, in fact, oh yeah, he didn't put links to every word, but I think most words are linked. So why he did his choice, also probably telling you something else, which I don't know. But it's a good example of, you know, again, misusing the domain name mechanism of the web in this way. A very famous example, again, like Jodi's work, very visual work. That's why I think it's kind of quite well known and well circulated in the visual art world. And Jodi has this duo from Belgium, I think, and they have this, interesting page. They use the famous view source of a page. Let me see if we can do that. The view source somewhere. Yeah. So if I do like a view source page of an HTML page, I see the code behind this image or behind this page that's rendered by the browser. In this page, you can scroll down a diagram of an atomic bomb, a nuclear bomb. And so like the famous bomb, they kind of redraw that using ASCII, text. You can see this here. And this way of making work, like using ASCII, like the American standard for, I forget the name, the coding. They use this for, they explain how the, cascading interactions between these elements, atomic elements work, and which causes the nuclear bombing, etc. So they put the entire diagram in this format as a code behind the scenes, like in the back of the web page. And this is quite interesting. And again, another like unexpected use of the qualities and properties of the web and the internet. I will explain one more example here, the floodnet from Electronic Disturbance Theater, again, 1998. If the page loads, we'll see, it may not. But this is basically you can think of it like let me see, like this group at the time, they wanted to support the Zapatista movement in Mexico, and they created this page where you can go to this page and load floodnet page, let's say, and then by doing this, you join a protest, which is automatically attacking or actually loading the pages of the governments of Mexico and the United States at the time. I think the Clinton era, I think it was. They were so by going to this page, you were actually attacking or joining the protest of attacking, or attacking means in this case very simply, very peacefully loading the page of a government multiple times so that it becomes unusable by the general public. Like the way, you might block a street on a street protest, they were blocking the page itself, the access to the page itself temporarily, of course. But this is like using what's later known as the DDoS attack, distributed denial of service attacks that are very common. That's why you have these CAPTCHAs and you have these like human recognition mechanisms for the web pages to prevent that, because these can happen anytime. If you are targeted, you can be attacked, in this way. Very interesting concept. Again, not so visual, but very like the loading time. This is like about the network dynamics, activities that happened on network. They're using this as part of their work. They have a page like this for this, just to give you an example. So an important work, I think, the simple net art diagram. This is the best example, the best explanation of what internet art is, I think. Like I said, internet art happens here. This is very famous. So it's not on the page, on the screen. It's actually in between screens, between computers. It's a relational work. It's about relations, not the objects. So MTA's, this work was very good, and it's being used a lot in schools everywhere around the world. With that, I want to also continue a couple of more examples. Natalie Jeremityenko's Suicide Box, a very interesting work. Again, not so visual, but actually it explains on the webpage. It's a motion detection video system designed to capture vertical activity. So this is to, when something falls from us, in front of the screen, let's say, it basically starts capturing that image. So it's used to actually capture, in this example, she placed this camera looking at the Golden Gate Bridge in California to basically, capture the suicides that are happening on this bridge. And I think in its installation of 100 days, it captured 17 images, about 17, I think, jumps from the bridge, probably. Very interesting concept, and kind of in a way showed that, an accurate data about the, the social phenomena that's happening with using this kind of technology. Very interesting concept. I think Natalia's work is quite amazing in general. This is a very early example of her work. And I think it can be considered within the net art genre, probably. Not that she was that active in that world, as far as I know, but this is a very good example. Another example, again, not so visual, but interesting concept, Bienal.py. Py is the Python extension. It's a Python code. 2001, this duo created this code that's a virus that spreads between computers. They, in order to experience this work as a virus, first of all, you have to have an antivirus program that can only show this to you, right? And also, at least they say you have to turn it off in order to get the virus into your computer, obviously. And they had a nice installation, like 2 computers. They are actually infecting and disinfecting each other, in this installation. It's a performance art in that way. That's very interesting. And from this, maybe we can move on. Let's see. From the net art ontologies, like in this simple net art diagram, to going. Another example of this was done by Abe Lincoln later on as a response to this work, called complex net art diagram. Is a huge image like this. Here, instead of the relation, it doesn't just happen between 2 computers, but it goes through many things, in our lives. I will do a more detailed version of this. It's a very long image. Look at this giant. But it starts from computer, goes into religious drawings, to your home, apartment. A lot of diagrams that are used every day in our lives go into the sewage system, our body, different diagrams and so on and so forth. Very interesting. And relations exist everywhere. Basically, is what it's saying. And it kind of focuses on not just the object again, but relations between computers and everywhere around the world, basically. Very interesting. And it ends up in a computer back again. 2003 diagram, but it actually explains very well that this is not just between computers, but between everything else. And in that way, I think artists started doing. I'll show just 2 last works. One is about the heat bunting again. He made this very interesting work called border crossing. And border crossing is it's a work that you can. I think it doesn't work this way today, but it shows you how to cross a border without paper within Europe. And this information is available only when you're in that border. And it shows you how to kind of cross the border, and then this, you can see this information. It becomes available, that particular detail about how to cross that border, if you go to this page and load it where you are there. So it's kind of connected to the GSM at some point. Very interesting concept, I think, from heat bunting. And last 2 works, Amazon Noir is one of my favorite works, by Paula Curio, Alessandro Ludovico, and Albert Morgan. They basically used Amazon's the bookshops, look inside this feature. If you remember that used to be still it exists, but it's limited. Basically allowed you, that feature allowed you to really look at the PDF of the book, and you were able to see the entire book from this interface. And they kind of used that to download, I think, around 3,000 books, and distribute. They distribute back them in the P2P file sharing services. And when Amazon noticed this kind of steal, they wanted to sue them, but they, I think, agreed later on. They didn't go to court. They agreed together off the court, and Amazon had to pay some money, some undisclosed amount of sum to this group. And this is kind of how they sold their art, if you think about it, by doing this kind of exploit of the Amazon system. And the same group also, they built this famous work, Google Will Eat Itself, using the advertising mechanism of Google. They served, advertising on a hidden network of websites, and that they use that money automatically to buy Google shares on the stock market. And this way, they kind of built this, circle, and they have this information here, how long it will take to buy Google itself, and so on. it's a good example of like a exploitative work or using exploitation in the artwork by this group. Yeah, so these are some of the works I want to talk about, basically, Greg, and there are like many other examples. Of course, this work is huge.
Well, let's jump into things, because for starters, one thing I'll say is that MTAA, the Art Happens Here diagram, I had tagged as my first question, and that just looks smarter every year, and it has since the first time I saw it, as explaining that. And also another thing that I kind of think about is that thinking about that Amazon Noir project to download books without permission, that reminds me of Aaron Schwartz, who similarly took information that was available online and, kind of got crushed by the system. So these might be two threads that we can kind of talk about today. But I'm wondering, maybe for some folks, you and I, there's people that remember the .com moment, and there's those that only, understand it as a phrase for describing an economic bubble. I'm wondering, I'd like to hear a little bit about what you think about what the Art Happens Here meant around the time 2000. Like, what was the magic of that from that time period?
Yeah, I think, it's a very clear explanation of what this is about, first of all, and like, also, I think in the art history, starting from, I think, 60s and on, many artists, especially who are working with performance art, especially, or kind of who are in between performance and activism, let's say, like, I remember the names later, but there were artists who were interested in like doing this non-institutional, more relational works. Like, they were like focusing on the relationship between people. But I think MTAA's diagram explains, and also that many net art examples explains that in this role of computer networks, yes, relationship is the key, and it takes place within the computers, which is not just the screen, what you see on the screen, but all the qualities of the internet itself, like domain names and loading times and so on and so forth, are the key material that we work with, for the artist. Of course, like, again, like, these are in line with all the other economic and political movements around us, obviously. Like you said, like, there was a .com boom at the same time, or after this time, like, this was more like 2001, I think. And I was, at the time, for me, like, I was working in Istanbul at an internet company. Think about it as a web buster. As a young person, like at early 20s. And yeah, for us, like, things like Napster, and then like there's one BitTorrent were the most important things. I had a Napster T-shirt, like save Napster T-shirt, like, think like interesting times. I wasn't doing art at all, but I learned about these things later on, kind of, when I started doing art, and I kind of explored this material. And after
were these works that you shared, is this the historical version of that you want to tell about net art, or are these the works that kind of pulled you into it?
Some of it, yeah, exactly. I wasn't aware of, let's say, form art when it was created. I kind of learned about it later on. But for instance, for Amazon Noir, it was my contemporary. Like, I was, actually, Morgan, I know them from here, blah, blah, blah. It was more like, that world, I think I started doing work more like 2004, 2005, or those years. And then, then suddenly, I even like met, we had a nice residency together with Uber Morgan later on. Like, it's like the time where, these artists. I think the other thing about this net art movement, historically, they kind of came after the fall of Berlin Wall, right? Like the rise of internet, early web, Berlin Wall collapsing. They're all at the same time happening, in parallel, more or less. And many artists were from Eastern Europe, Slovenia, Yugoslavia, ex-Yugoslavia, etc. And these artists were, they were there trying to kind of get out from their worlds. The web was the connection to the world, all that. Those ideas are there. Like, like when I was growing up in Turkey, like even more eastern part of Europe, let's say, there was no like access to magazines and stuff, international magazines, So the web was a big opening for me. My personal experience, a longer story, but basically, downloading the music, like notes, for instance, is something I was doing the early user of that time. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was great. I mean, I think that the thing that a lot of people can't comprehend this today is this idea of scarcity of information. Not being able to find necessarily, maybe not being able to find magazines, or maybe like your cultural node is a record shop or something pre-internet. I mean, it's impossible for folks to imagine with the infinite catalogs of Spotify and such. Okay, so I have a quick question. Like, one thing I think about, and one of the things I think about when I think about net art, and I don't know if I really have a timeline for it in my head. I kind of have 90s.com, 2000s is a bit of a blur, and then Tumblr and the jogging clubs. We had people collecting works and kind of taking the practice to these microblogging platforms that popped up. But one of the things that I feel, not as somebody knowing that field super well, that changed, and I don't know if corrupted is the right word, but changed the material of the web, was the emergence of social media in the 2000s. And else another time in the series, we talked to Joanne McNeil, and she and other people have talked about this idea that what social media did was make a different type of subject online. And the way that she and other researchers, scholars have described it is like a user versus a person. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what, I mean, it's a big question. So the degree when, you can kind of encapsulate this, but like, what did social media mean, say 2006, 2008 to net art? And I know that net art was a moving thing. It wasn't ever one thing. It was, a procession of people working in particular ways. Because again, I think of our younger viewers who, some of which cannot imagine a pre-social media social sphere, which always blows my mind. But
yeah, it's crazy, actually. True. Yeah. MySpace, Friendster,
yep.
Friendster, MySpace. These were early social media examples. I myself created a social media for a company at the time. One of those small ones, probably.
After being webmaster.
Yeah, exactly. Facebook was starting. I was just at MIT at the time, and it was like next to me, like our undergrad assistants were actually were talking about this, showing us these Facebook pages, and I was like, oh, what is this? Like social media? What?
Yeah.
Like this is the time where I'm trying to build these software systems for whatever, like Open Studio project, for instance, and we can talk about later on. But yeah, I mean, things change all the time. We can definitely talk about the centralization of the internet, and this is the power, the network effects actually is the underlying reason of why this happened. Network effects meaning like when someone becomes part of a network of things, the devices, let's say, like the fax machine, for instance, a good example of that. When you have a fax machine on your own, it doesn't mean anything, but we have fax machines in our community, in our whatever global community, then it becomes very useful, right, over time. Similarly, social media, when you join, you only have few friends, doesn't mean much, it's not valuable for you. But as soon as many people join and they start following you and they start sharing stuff with you, it becomes super powerful. Like you cannot actually leave. It just kind of locks you in there, That's the reason actually these social media, successful social media platforms like Facebook and others became so, people got maybe addicted to them because of these social dynamics that they are taking place there. And there they kind of cleverly, used all these behavioral economics techniques, like for instance, notification, nudging people to do things. And, these are like dopamines that come to our bodies when you kind of hear this, when you see like 5 people like your whatever post, you become happy for a second and then you forget about it. These are like kind of, they create addictions, like in the drugs in general, and we are all part of it. This became a very powerful influence, I think, in people's lives over the years. And to this day, we still have that, like we have Twitter today, maybe, or like Instagram, for instance. Like they do this more like image with images now, and they create all kinds of ways to nudge you and through these social networks. This is very hard to leave them, because when you do that, you have no friends, kind of suddenly. You feel like that, at least in the social world. Yeah, social internet world, let's say. And I think we start seeing artists, like a newer generation net artists, let's say, started doing work in this area too. They start criticizing these platforms that are more complex there than a simple web page or like an internet system. They are more complex data systems. They collect data about people. They kind of create predictions about them. They create these like nudging notification systems and so on and so forth. And many artists started using this as a material itself again. Once again, artists like Aaron Bartle, for instance, like one example comes to my mind, and does this. He started, I think, doing work with Second Life, maybe. I remember that. Maybe it was the thing, like he was trying to bring the digital objects into the physical world, for instance. Very interestingly, like that shock, that kind of surprise element, kind of affects, makes you think about it again, like you're immersed.
I remember his very famous work with him with like the World of Warcraft sword in real life. I mean, he did that many times, the Google Map pin, and I just remember those works, like the bring it back from the digital. Like that was a very novel idea then. And again, that's now something that might be kitschier, but did it first. Yeah,
exactly. These are like, again, to talking about history here. I think the most famous of his work, I think, is the Google's pin for the location. He built a real life version of that, like a huge one. So like you're in the physical world, and then there's this giant thing, is a sculpture, but that's from Google Earth or Google Maps. And then, it's very like, it makes you think and discuss, and like it makes it a shock for you, and then it makes you think of question these things a little bit. So yeah, there are like also, like for instance, myself, I did work on social media a lot, criticizing them. It may not be considered net art today, but it's actually the same genre, more or less, like continuation of that. Meta markets was, for instance, an interesting work.
Exactly what I wanted to ask you about. And for the uninitiated, you should look this work up, because I think it was extremely just like prescient. It allows users to essentially turn your social media profiles into like stocks and buy and sell. And I was a user, and I got dopamine from it. But yeah, I think like I would love to hear you thinking about this work this many years, 10 plus years later. Yeah, because it nailed the commodification of the self. That I'm building my brand and all that. So please let's hear it. I love it.
So this was a time when iPhone started, 2007. When Facebook opened up its API to the world for the first time, so you can actually programmatically query the Facebook database and get data out of it. And I was at MIT, done with Open Studio project, and I was out from school trying to do something in my life and doing artworks, etc. And I started really building. My question was basically like, how much value as a user I create for a platform. And you cannot just ask this question to a platform itself, right? You cannot just go ask Facebook, hey, what's my value to you? My individual personal value, how much money I generate or you earn from my activities. There's no answer to this from this company. So if we cannot learn from this information from them, can we learn it from outside of this world? Can we create another system that will help us to find this information? And this was the idea of a stock market for social media profiles. And if you can create that, the market mechanism itself will automatically, or through this, buy-sell relationships, a price may emerge for your individual kind of asset. So I built this thing so that you can actually do an initial public offering, like in the stock market. You do initial public offering for your own social media profile of Facebook, by then Flickr. Delicious was a bookmarking system, and YouTube, Twitter, etc. could happen too. And then you divide your shares into you divide your profile into 1,000 shares, on half of it, you do an auction, a Dutch auction, where people can bid and make an initial pricing evaluation. Then they can buy and sell your work through as a game money, a virtual currency that I made up at the time. This is before Bitcoin and blockchains existed. And with that, with this game money, it was super fun, by the way. Like thousands of people were on this page and trying to, play with this, buy, sell shares from each other, like yourself, Mize, and others, and how much you own from whom makes suddenly a new layer of a network, a social network on top of the existing social networks. It was interesting, unexpected outcome. People on the forums were discussing like the valuation models for, our profiles, because we were showing both the what's called fair value, the actual number of users, blah, 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 of your profile, and the market price, which is the current, price that comes out of the buy and sell relationships. It was a 2 or 3 years project, and I wasn't able to run it further on because it was very expensive. And then at the time I was in New York, still New York, and there my friends told me like, oh, you should start a company out of this. I didn't want to turn this into yet another company at the time, and there was no other option for me to keep it. Should I keep it running or leave it? Blah, blah, blah. I just turned it off after a while. I announced this to the people, and then I said we cannot do this anymore because it was really expensive. As more people use it, the traffic creates a lot of cost to you on your servers. But I enjoyed it that way, and then I think it was considered like a I think Trevor Schultz of the Digital Labor Conference at the time, he invited me there, and I was participating in the first one, presenting meta markets. And then we even created a user labor, like a data standard out of it, which was to kind of explain what type of data points actually create value for a user's participation in social media. We kind of created that framework. This was also presented in the Digital Labor Conference and Trevor Schultz conference. It was really good at the time. 2011, I think was the year for this.
Sounds about right. I mean, for our viewers, just to understand, this was the moment that there was fairly unbridled enthusiasm about all these networks. And we didn't have the word surveillance capitalism as a phrase yet. And we were all perhaps a little naive. So I remember it was like, I was so excited about my online peers when I was using it. So it was kind of like a very much a timing thing. And now I would just see it as, a different, like, I think I just saw something like on crypto Twitter yesterday about some service like this monetizing Twitter profile shares or something. And I mean, why even bother? Because Elon has literally monetized impressions anyways, and you've got people maybe making $12,000 for their first check, but also making $4, so yeah, again, quite prescient. I don't know, do you have kind of just thoughts on that kind of jump from, if you were to jump from meta markets and that moment to now, any kind of just broad commentary on monetization of self?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think I remember around that time, there were also a lot of artists interested in quantified self, like not even more monetized self, but quantified self, which is like, all these devices that you use to track your everyday activities and analyze it, like from how much money you spend to how much exercise you do, your heart rate, blah, 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 everything, like the Fitbit, the smartphone watches or something. These were like tracking devices that you kind of use in your life. Even like the Amazon's, what was it called? Alexa, for instance, like these things like that will normally, they are promoted as like the devices that will make your life smarter, kind of. They're promoted like that, but they are like the, like you said, surveillance capitalist devices that track everything and try to make more predictions about your life. And around that time, I did another work, for instance, in My Pocket, a bit earlier than even meta markets. It was like my considered first artwork, let's say, commissioned by Turbulence at the time. Thanks again for them. And it was like really about this. It was about the quantified, monetized, our behavior of ourselves. And I downloaded my bank transactions and turned them into a prediction algorithm and made predictions about myself every other day. Like this is like a live system. Every 12 a.m. in the morning, wakes up, makes calculations based on my bank data, and makes the predictions about what will I buy next that day. I will then check them out on my phone, newly bought iPhone 2007 again, and as an RSS feed. If you remember, RSS feed was a way of publishing at the time. They have decentralized publishing system to kind of show my today's predictions and what I bought yesterday and so on. And this is a work, and my goal was there to really provoke that idea that predictions are possible and this is that easy. Even I can do this as an artist in a couple of months of work. Think about these financial systems, these social media platforms, what they can do about us, how much they know, and with all that data they have, and how much prediction capacity they have about us. And as a result, what they do, as well written in the Surveillance Capitalism book, these predictions are actually sold as data points to companies, other companies, advertisers, so that they can not just, in the right time, right moment, so that we buy that product, basically. So our cells are not products anymore, but our behaviors that are calculated ahead of time become the product. We became as Shoshana Zuboff says, we became the raw material for this product. Kind of interesting concept, I think. So those were the years. But of course, coming to today, there are new opportunities to get out of the system. I don't know, we can maybe talk about that a little bit. And all these artworks were kind of a precursor to question these mechanisms and systems. And now, there are new openings, basically. So yeah, I think, let's see, I was going to say something, I forgot.
Yeah, it was a really big question in your defense, so no worries. Yeah, but there is something about that jump though, because not that net art was uncritical, and you showed the DDoS attack, and a lot of the early works were quite politically informed. You're right. I guess something I've always thought about it as a viewer, and it's not like it's either or mutually exclusive, but it's like reconciling like the gap between what I consider this innocent experimentation and I don't know, Cambridge Analytica or something, which I think is like the end game of what you were just talking about, that moment that the prediction economy started to change the world and wasn't just a matter of like selling marketing eyeballs. Anyways, in your defense, I need to formulate a question for you. I'll just say that it warms my heart to hear somebody thank a commissioning arts organization like 15 or 20 years later. Nice form.
Yeah.
We always have to remember who helps us along the way, right?
Definitely, it's like very critical, yeah.
Okay, well, I guess I don't know if we're jumping it too early, but it is a way. You did talk about new ways to get out from the system, and your practice. You kind of like, in our conversations, you talked about your art career being on pause a little bit, and you've been kind of reinvigorated by the blockchain space. But this is not the story of another artist just selling NFTs of abstract art. You've brought this institutional critique to the blockchain space. So I'd love it if you could just talk a little bit about social contracts, and then even beyond that, just like what opportunity you see for getting out from under the system in the blockchain and distributed network space.
Yeah, I think but before even that, like one thing like you mentioned, I've done after like maybe after doing like a lot of work about like the early social media platforms, and like I did a lot of network mapping and analysis of like revealing power relationships and so on and so forth at the time. Again, this technique is something that's used a lot by net artists at different times in their practice, and I used that for myself. Like one mentioned very important, dayrule.net was an important website to kind of map power relationships between companies and their board members. And one person sitting in multiple boards is like an important connection between companies. And today there is like a very important organization in the US called Little Sis, opposite of Big Brother. They're a database of like powerful people in the US, mostly their political power, their capital power, and shows maps of relationships of these different things. And it's a big database, very important. So I was like, early on inspired by this type of work too, and I wanted to create a mapping system for anyone to use it for themselves, for their own research and practice. And this became Graph Commons over time. I was teaching this as a workshop and lectures and courses and so on, and then I turned into an online tool on the web that anyone can use freely. And it became and it can store data, and I can share this with other people as maps and so on. It became a service later on. And this, like, while I was like doing my art practice, I did it on the side, but then suddenly became a major thing in my life. And then I had to turn it into a business and to self-sustain it itself and so on and so forth. So there's an entire story that way. And for quite a while, I didn't do any new artworks, and only starting with 2017, 18, I started spending time to understand how blockchains work and how Bitcoin actually works. And, what does that mean? Like, we know it's like, digital currency of some sort, and what that means, it doesn't, allow third parties to be in between us when I send money from you to Canada to you through a bank and so on. So I really spent time to read this stuff and understand how it works actually. And I had a huge interest in distributed systems earlier, like even like with how I spent time how BitTorrent works, to understand how it works and blah, blah, blah. So I entered the Bitcoin world this way, and Bitcoin blockchain in general, and created a very interesting, I think this, and I realized that they allow, first of all, like this interesting capacity, that sending money between us without a third party is a very interesting concept, and which also made me realize that, actually, historically, how banks actually work, how, currencies actually work. I had to start read the stuff, go back, open up these economy books, history books. David Graeber was a very important person in this effort, for instance, like his book, The First 5,000 Years, the history of debt, the first 5,000 years, super influential on me, and others too, like a lot of other readings. And I really had to understand monetary system and how it works and so on to really get the impact of this thing, of this thing called blockchain and Bitcoin. So after like going through these rabbit holes, like many people did, I started thinking about, okay, how can we do art using this thing, And then I started seeing people around me like doing some interesting experiments here and there, and then the NFT thing started after a while, and I wasn't very much into it at first. I was aware of it, but I was more interested in like really like the net artist tradition, like to question the NFT itself and its mechanism, and maybe do something about it instead of just putting another image to the web with the NFT contract. This made me totally focus on this project called Social Contracts, where it's basically when you mint the project, there's a program that's triggered, which goes and traces all the NFTs that you own in your wallet and other accounts who own from these NFTs and their other NFTs. So it builds a big network of collectors and artists, and from that makes predictions about what you might get that you don't have today in your collection in the future. So again, a prediction system, like I've done a lot of prediction models before. Like you said, prediction economy is something that's like, in our, it's the thing about of this time. So this was, again, another approach that this time, obviously, data is available on blockchains. It's full public. And my focus, again, this was, in this time, more on the, the fact that this is public, all this is, again, predictable, like our other information, but this time difference is it's all available to any other actor in the world. This doesn't mean this is secure or safe, this is all in the public. We are even maybe more vulnerable by using this mechanism. But of course, at the same time, this is a question, right? But at the same time, it has other sides of it. It has obviously removes the intermediaries in between, which is amazing. That's a very important, historical development. But at the same time, we have to question this. Like, we need private communication mechanism in this blockchain system, and this is possible. It will be more possible soon, but that's coming. And I was kind of trying to highlight that this work basically. It's also fun. It used all the things I developed before, the Graph Commons itself as a tool. You know, it showed us visualization, interactive visualizations that you can browse through, etc. So reusing existing tools basically was very helpful there. Yeah, I think one thing about that blockchain art, let's say blockchain art, like net art, similar to net art, it's artists using blockchain. They have the same, I think, drive. They basically misuse or use in subversive ways that the blockchain itself, its mechanisms. They're used as a media, and they reach people in new ways, like the way that artists did, you know. And they also operate out of the institutional art world, so they are basically, you know, circumventing them, or they find new ways of, you know, autonomy and collectivity in their work. So, and I think blockchain has this capacity, and artists are using this way again. Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that later on if you like, but yeah.
Yeah, well, let me jump in right there, because you just said a word that makes me think back to Alexei Shulgin, who had his hand in a few interesting quasi-manifestos in the net art moment. And I was, you know, I spent this morning going through the Rhizome art base, which I recommend anybody who's watching and enjoying this do, because you'll get a great chronology of all these works, some of which we talked about, some of which we didn't, some of which are very well known, many of which are less known, all relevant though. But one of Alexei's projects, the Introduction to Net Art in 1997, it basically is like, this is what net artists are and this is what they do. And it said they break down autonomous disciplines and they maintain independence from institutional bureaucracies. And that kind of sounds like the way you're talking about the blockchain right now, I have to say.
Right.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like it's a little full circle. Could you just talk about a little bit about the autonomy that you can see in blockchain? Because I know a lot of people, when you start talking about it, they just want to talk about, maybe they want to talk about speculation, which is warranted, and maybe they want to, you know, for a long time they wanted to talk about the environmental issues around Ethereum, which is an issue that has largely been resolved. So I kind of view these as, like, I don't want to say canards, but like it's not that the critiques weren't relevant, but they got in the way of, I don't know if it's as simple as saying that the good that could come with, but I don't think many people understand, like, the cypherpunk origins and the, you know, sure, they can be libertarian, but I don't think many people understand the kind of, like, what Bitcoin, and I don't want to, like, turn this into evangelizing about it, but I'm just wondering, like, about, like, what you see in these networks. I wonder if you could spell it out for somebody who maybe hasn't done anything more than bought some Ethereum and blockchain, or Bitcoin, sorry, or maybe, you know, only is kind of lukewarm about the idea and not involved in the ecosystems or any, you know, investing or anything. That I'm really curious to hear your take.
I think one thing that's important to remember, that, you know, all networks, the internet or blockchain, they are antagonistic in their nature, meaning they are like both sides of it. Like, it can be used for dark, for, you know, for good thing as well at the same time. And we know this existed since the beginning. And this is a theorization of that myself. I learned this from Özgür Uçkan, who was a great thinker of network activism in general, and philosophy too. And I mean, this concept of, you know, antagonism that exists, you know, the opposing powers, they are in the nature of this media. So as a result of that, we all have both, you know, I know they call it child porn, you know, on the internet, but at the same time, you have the businesses and you know, art and everything together, right? Same thing for blockchain and Bitcoin too. You can do, like, you know, anything dark, but at the same time, it's super, you know, it will change society in a very good way, you know. And we, for the first time in the history, probably, we have a verifiable mechanism, like, that can actually help coordinate. Let's say it better way, like, we have for the first time, we have a verifiable coordination mechanism. This didn't exist before. Like, governments and states, they have archives, and we look at them for auditing after the facts when things happen. But there was no way before that, things happen only because there's a possibility of historical record that you can verify. Then you can actually do that. Blockchains allow this kind of a transaction mechanism, which I think is very interesting. It changes. I think it will not just change, everyday life. It's like the entire societal system we have today. So we are just in the beginning of that big shift, I think, still. And that's one thing. So speculation and buying and selling and making money out of it is one thing. That's fine. Obviously, for the first time in history, also everyone is an investor now, right? We used to be. Investor in terms of maybe it's called better way. Everyone is a VC, like venture investor. Like you're not buying at old companies' shares from stock market. You're investing in a new startup when you buy a token, right? It's a big difference, This is very risky, obviously, and a lot of people lose money from this. It's the reason there are laws in the world that in different countries, like which prevents people, like ordinary citizens, to invest in risky assets because they can lose them. If they don't know about it, if they're not professional enough about this, you can lose a lot of money easily, and it's just going to ruin your life. It's like gambling, right? But at the same time, there are other, again, it's antagonistic discussion. There are other sides, like you have now, and there's no permission needed to buy a token, right? Usually, and especially globally. In the US, there are laws and stuff that's different. But globally, you can buy any token that's available in your wallet, and this way you are investing in a startup. And that will give you a lot of returns if it's successful, right? The opposite can happen too. So this opportunity wasn't available before. It was only limited to people who had, let's say, more than $1 million in their bank account. Mm-hmm. So this is one. This is one. Let's say one thread, let's say, of the blockchain story, right? There are many other things, and this idea of investing early and so on and so forth is an opportunity for many people. So it opens up a lot of new windows to people. Then the other part, like I think the important discussion of verifiability is critical. That this system, it's a common database, doesn't belong to any company or government. It's a commons, and there we store verifiable data. Any data that's stored there has a track record that you can go back and check if it's correct or not. Even like software systems work based on this type of traceable data, back to its origin. And this way, this verifiability aspect is very interesting for many reasons. And like some artists started using this concept, like verifiability. And this I don't have enough time how this works, in cryptographic terms, but that's another story. You can find a lot of good information about this. Maybe you can leave links under this video later on for this to learn about how blockchains actually work. But in general, the impact of it is on society will be huge. And at the same time, it will bring these tensions, like you said, like the both sides again, and sometimes it's abused and used by states and powerful actors. Sometimes they cannot do that. It's impossible, They cannot stop Bitcoin, for instance, because there are so many network activities around the world. It's global. And if one party wants to block it or stop it, then it will escape to another part of the world, and then there'll be more innovation there. All these things bring back tension to the home, and then you have to regulate it in some democratic way. You realize that the state, for instance. Anyway, so this is an entire big discussion going forward. But I think going back to the art part of it, like the way I think that artists explore their own medium of the early web. Today, artists are working with blockchains, and they are trying to understand how verifiability works. What's that mean to use a hash function, to represent something cryptographically, and ideas of signatures and multiple signatures, or something that proves that you have the author of this thing, digital object, for instance. There are a lot of different qualities of blockchain media, let's say, and artists use them in their own creative way as a material,
Yeah, I like this because you're kind of describing, I mean, it's exactly like, the web form, which seemed like this new thing being turned into a canvas, literally. The same thing with the blockchain artists. Like, look at how much certification of ownership has impacted culture already. I know that, the critics will say there's not that many people treating NFTs, blah, blah, blah. But I feel like this idea of digital collectibles is not going anywhere, regardless of what the NFT market is doing.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, no, so it's interesting. So do you think there is going to be, like, I mean, if we are going to kind of, and I guess we're kind of headed towards wrapping things up, do you kind of see the possibility of what's the saying, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes? Like, do you see or already see kind of the net art trajectory happening in the blockchain space?
Good question, like actually. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think first of all, the powerful actors always want to hold on to their power, like as usual. That doesn't change. History repeats there, for sure. And then the others, those who wants to get out of this power or wants the freedom and the equality for their lives, they are pushing for the other direction, right? This part same into history, basically. What's new is the material. Again, this new technology and this all the things that it enables is new. So it's a matter of who will use this better. This opportunity better, basically. And artists is one part of this puzzle, and there are also a lot of different actors who are involved in blockchain technology, trying to use it for good, and then there are other sides who are trying to benefit from its, whatever capacity in their own way, in their own, greedy ways in general. It's open question still. We don't know what will happen, but it will. I think it's a matter of how much you basically, use in your own benefits. And I think one important thing is here, like the question of privacy comes back again into discussion. I think a good decentralization, like decentralization itself, is one thread that's like misused a lot by the greedy actors, especially. Like they say, we decentralize this, decentralize that, but when you look at behind the scenes, the real information, the real actual situation, they are often not. Then they say, oh, we are in the process of decentralization. Then that's another level. There's always a way to explain or state these things in different ways. So I think decentralization and privacy are the two main factors in blockchain discussion. Having sufficient decentralization and sufficient privacy will allow the good part to win over time, I think. But this is a battle, as we said, it's an antagonistic world.
Right. So it's only the second round if it's a boxing match. It's going to go 12 rounds. We'll see who comes out on top. Yeah. Well, I think this is great. Burak, thank you so much. I have to say, I have a pretty good understanding of the net art kind of history, but your schematization and the resources you shared at the beginning, you were filling in a lot of blanks for me. So I hope our viewers find that super useful. Like, there was stuff in there I didn't know, certainly stuff I did but didn't. Okay. But I'd like to thank you for sharing all this with us today. And I would like to remind our viewers that we will be picking up this series later in the fall in a similar conversation that we had today with Karsten Schmidt. So Burak, thank you very much for your generosity today. And now I'm going to go, like, I don't know, think about net art and blockchain and the fact that like 20 years have gone by, but also nothing has changed. I think that's what I'm going to go think about on the mountain this weekend.
Okay. Yeah. One thing I want to say before we close, if possible, Greg.
Sure, please.
There's like two important sources, I should say, about the blockchain-based art. People should check this out. I didn't share them, and one of them is you can see it here, guild.art. is
Yeah.
IS. And this is a list of it's a group that I'm part of as well. It's a group of, it's listing basically important artists and art events and publications and educational resources for people to check out. Definitely check this out for your work. And then the other one is JPEG. It's the creation platform kind of, or like a protocol, I should say, on the platform. They do like art curation and exhibitions on chain. Quite interesting resource for anyone who's interested in the blockchain-based art today.
Yeah. And JPEG, I'll just say, is great because like they kind of show us that not everything has to be like an NFT platform in the traditional sense, like another walled garden, right? This is what we apparently want in the blockchain space, is not more walled gardens, but true interoperability and permissionlessness and all that, all the good things.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Burak.